Picture this. You wake up, the room is pitch black, the house is dead quiet, but your heart is just racing. And for a split second, lying there in the dark, you get this eerie, incredibly intimate feeling. You'd swear someone else was just inside that dream with you. Not physically in the room, but actually wandering around inside your subconscious. It's a feeling a lot of us have had, right? But normally we just shake it off by the time we're brushing our teeth and getting on with our day. But what if it wasn't just a trick of the waking mind? Welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to unpack one of the most fascinating and honestly bizarre scientific mysteries of the 20th century. So let's dive right in. Can strangers actually share the exact same dream? I mean, it sounds like the plot of a sci-fi movie, doesn't it? Like something involving mind-reading mutants or top-secret government programs. But we're not talking about Hollywood here. Back in the 1960s, which, remember, was an era when science was generously funding everything from the space race to some seriously out-there stuff, a group of very serious scientists in Brooklyn decided to test this exact question. They weren't just sitting around writing philosophical papers about the nature of sleep. No, they set out to definitively prove whether or not this paranormal phenomenon was actually real. And that brings us to the Maimonides Dream Lab. This place was run by a highly respected psychiatrist named Montague Ullman and a brilliant young researcher, Stanley Krippner. So this was definitely not some fringe back alley operation. These guys were legit scientists. They applied pure clinical rigor and the strict scientific method to a premise that, quite frankly, sounded absolutely insane. Could one human mind actively beam an image directly into another sleeping human mind? To even attempt to answer that, they had to design a highly controlled environment, totally stripping away all the mystical stuff usually associated with dream interpretation and replacing it with hard, cold data.
Let's walk through how they actually did this, because it played out almost like a highly coordinated heist. Step 1. A person designated as the sender was locked completely alone in a room. Their only job was to stare intently at a randomly chosen piece of art and just concentrate. They were literally trying to mentally push that image through the walls and down the hallway. Step 2. In a totally soundproof room nearby, a complete stranger, the receiver, was sleeping, but they weren't just taking a casual nap. They were wired up to an EEG machine. Researchers sought in the dark, watching the brainwaves spike and dip, waiting for the exact moment the receiver entered REM sleep, which is that crucial deep sleep stage where vivid dreaming happens. The second REM kicked in, boom, the researchers would wake them up and ask, "What were you just dreaming?" Finally, step 3. They took the raw, rambling transcripts of those dreams and handed them over to independent blind judges. These judges had absolutely no idea what the original target artwork was. Their sole job was to compare those wild dream transcripts to a stack of possible pictures and guess which one the sender had been staring at.
So what actually came out of all this elaborate staging? Well, if this was all just nonsense, the independent judges' guesses should have matched random chance, right? Like flipping a coin or picking a card from a deck. But they didn't. Over and over again, across years of trials, the Dream Lab's success rate stubbornly landed above random chance. Now, to be clear, it wasn't some perfect psychic-level accuracy where someone dreamt of the exact brushstrokes and colors of a hidden painting. But statistically speaking, the data was consistently, noticeably better than random guessing. Against all conventional logic, something seemed to be happening in those soundproof rooms. And the details the dreamers described often lined up with the target images in ways that felt, honestly, way too specific to just shrug off as a lucky guess. Like if the sender was staring at a painting of a boat, the receiver might actually dream of the ocean or the feeling of drowning. Suddenly, these results were being published, causing a massive spike in credibility for what was previously a totally fringe field. Parapsychology, the study of stuff like telepathy and clairvoyance, suddenly had the most rigorously tested data it had ever seen. For a few wild years in the early 1970s, it genuinely looked like Ullman and Krippner had proven that human minds could communicate through dreams. The scientific establishment was completely stunned. Naturally, the media just ate this up. But as with all great scientific mysteries, we really have to look past that initial excitement. Because here's what the headlines completely left out. Science isn't just about doing an experiment once and getting a cool result. It's about whether someone else can follow your exact recipe in a completely different laboratory and bake the exact same cake. And when other scientists around the country tried to replicate the Maimonides experiment, well, they couldn't. The telepathic effect they were searching for kept shrinking, or in most cases, it just vanished completely into the static of normal, everyday dreams. So, what went wrong? When critics finally looked under the hood of the Dream Lab's data, they found some pretty massive structural cracks.
First off, it turned out some of the judges weren't fully blind to the target images, which, completely compromises the integrity of the whole guessing process. Second, they were using extremely small sample sizes. That means just a couple of lucky guesses could wildly skew the data to look like a huge success. But the absolute most crucial insight here, and this is a huge problem that plagues modern research too, is something called the file drawer effect. Basically, this is the habit of proudly publishing all the experiments that get hits or exciting results, while quietly locking all the failed trials, the misses, away in a filing cabinet drawer. When you only show the world your wins, you end up creating a deeply flawed, completely artificial version of reality. And this led to a pretty rapid rise and fall for the whole enterprise. In the 1960s, the lab opened full of incredible promise. Through the early 70s, they were riding high on years of above-average hits and intense media buzz. But as those critical cracks began to show, and as other labs completely failed to replicate the work, the broader scientific community just pulled back. By the late 1970s, the funding simply dried up. Without the money to keep those soundproof rooms running and the EEG machines humming, the Maimonides Dream Lab was forced to permanently close its doors in 1978. It's actually a perfect example of how the strict application of the scientific method will ultimately course-correct initial hype. So the really crucial point here is understanding the difference between the paranormal myth we all kind of want to believe, that romantic idea that our brains are basically radio towers broadcasting secret signals through the night air to sleeping strangers, and the scientific reality, which honestly is actually much more fascinating. When two people who know each other have a shared dream, they aren't being telepathic. What's actually happening is that their brains are processing the exact same daily inputs. Think about it. If you and your partner share the same daily stress, read the exact same horrific evening news, and have the exact same conversations right before bed, your brains are being fed the exact same raw material. Think of your brain during REM sleep as a master puzzle solver. Its job is to take all the fragmented pieces of your day, the lingering stress, the ambient sounds, the fleeting sights, and synthesize them all together into a coherent, even if totally strange, narrative. If two people are given the exact same puzzle pieces from waking life, it shouldn't be a paranormal shock when they end up building very similar pictures in their sleep. Honestly, we should absolutely praise those 1960s scientists for having the dedication to build a real lab to test something so bizarre. But the awe-inspiring truth here isn't magic. It's that human brains arriving at identical dreams by sheer coincidence shows just how universally our minds process the incredibly complex world around us. And that brings us to a thought I really want you to take away from this explainer. Your brain isn't broadcasting. It's just really, really good at making meaning out of coincidence. We are deeply biologically wired to find patterns, to connect the dots, and to find meaning in a chaotic world. The fact that your sleeping mind can take the random, chaotic noise of a Tuesday and weave it into a narrative so vivid that it perfectly aligns with someone else's, well, that might actually be a stranger and more incredible power than telepathy ever could be. So let me leave you with this. Have you ever had a dream that felt like it was fully yours? And if you have, what puzzle pieces from your waking life was your brain desperately trying to put together?